He's the anchor. He's the anchor for our souls, for our souls.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to Scripture Night. All right. And we're going to be hitting Revelation chapter 8 today. And we're going to be discussing a lot of motif language that God used in the Old Testament to better understand Revelation chapter 8 and what is really going on. And there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be unveiled to us through this process. So a brief review from chapter 6 and 7. So seals 1 to 4 was all about like kind of wars and rumors of wars, if you will. And then you'll note that seal number 5 is quite a bit different. All of a sudden you see these martyrs, and they're actually praying for vengeance, essentially, right? They want the Lord, who is holy and true, to avenge their blood. Very different seal. And because we take a historical point of view, I'm under the impression that that's the first century saints. And in that process, those prayers are actually what we call imprecatory prayers. And hopefully I pronounced that right. It's essentially where you're asking God, right, to help you through all this wicked tyranny that's coming towards you. And so we're going to review some of those types of prayers. There's some psalms and quite a few of those. And we are permitted to ask God to help us and stamp out the wickedness. And then, of course, seal number 7, prior to seal number 7 is seal number 6, which is the preparation for the judgment that's going to be coming upon primarily Israel. And so you're seeing this preparation where he's guarding and protecting his own people prior to that judgment. And then, of course, seal number 7 is where we're introduced to the trumpets. And that is going to be representing essentially the Feast of Trumpets, which must be fulfilled because, as Jesus had said, not one jot or tittle can pass from the law till all things be fulfilled. And that would include the Feast of Trumpets. Okay? So some of the things that we're going to see in Revelation chapter 8, I think it's going to unveil what much of the book of Hebrews speaks to. That is to show that much of the Levitical priesthood of Old Covenant Israel, all those instructions was essentially a physical pattern of what actually goes on in the heavenlies and what many of those rudiments and instructions were really representing. It was a physical representation of what actually happens in the heavenlies. And again, it also reveals imprecatory prayers and the response to that. And we're going to see that in Revelation chapter 8. It's God responding to those prayers of those martyred saints, maybe the living ones who are still undergoing persecution, as well as the ones, that were already martyred, as we saw in seal number 5. And it also reveals, I think chapter 8 of the book of Revelation reveals the authority structures. When you're seeing these heavenly things like turn to blood or be smitten or falling, this is the kind of language that God used in the Old Testament to represent a loss of stability and rigor and roar, if you will, on the earth. So it's not the sun actually, falling down or the moon actually bleeding out. It's actually representation of the governmental structures, if you will, and the political structures and the things that are happening on earth. So, for example, and we're going to review this a little bit, a lot of the Roman Empire kings, for example, right, and emperors like Caligula, for example, he was murdered. Claudius was poisoned by his own wife just to bring Nero in. And then, of course, Nero kind of got unhinged and ends up committing suicide. And then Galba is also murdered. And the same type of thing is happening in Israel, where you have Herod the Great and Herod Antipas and Herod Agrippa and all these people that are either dying or being killed, right, through violent ways. And that's the motif that he uses when the essentially the organization of the heavenlies. He speaks that way to show you all this destruction or falling apart and chaos that's happening on the earth. It's not the literal sun, moon, and stars falling or anything of that nature. All right. And we're also going to see, as I mentioned before, the fulfillment of the Feast of Trumpets. And so I'm going to give you a little background, really brief if I can, because again, I believe that this was all fulfilled in 70 AD. What was the Feast of Trumpets always representing in those Israelite feasts? It was a preparation for a holy war. What's a holy war? It's justice. It's justice against people who are creating tyranny and oppressing and harming innocent people. That's what a holy war is. It wasn't too often, by the way, but when there was one, it was called, and they used the trumpets, and we're going to show you how that was happening in history. It also summons God's people to worship and pray, and it also signals the appearance of the Ark of the Covenant, and it's also a warning of attack. So it's a signal. When you hear those trumpets, it's a warning. It's a warning that attacks are going to be happening. And of course, the Feast of Trumpets also ushers in the coronation of a king. So you're going to see a lot of that going on in Revelation chapter 8 and other chapters in the book of Revelation to fulfill all of the old covenant laws, because that's what Jesus came to do. That's how God fulfilled all those old covenant laws, was through Christ. So you're going to see, as I mentioned, a lot of apocalyptic and allegorical language, and we're going to learn about that and how it carries right into the New Testament. We're going to even look into the book of Acts for some of that material as well. And you're going to see in Revelation 8, when that seal 7 gets popped, the collapse of beauty and authority and order. All right, so that's what we're going to be unveiling in Revelation chapter 8. So the first thing, though, because this is kind of issuing judgment, I want to go to Acts here real quick, chapter 17, verse 31. And notice we talked about this where Paul writes that he's about to judge. So the book of Acts being obviously in the first century, it wasn't that he shall judge, which most English translations say he shall judge, leaving it very open-ended. No, he's not going to, one day, but who knows? This is pronouncing the judgment, if you will, on Old Covenant Israel primarily. And by the way, this does send a shock wave, as you can imagine, to the rest of the known Roman world at the time. So very key to see that it says that Paul is writing, he said a day in which he is about to judge. So this is mello. This word, some people pronounce it mayo. It's a word that says future, but immediate future. All right. But I want to focus on this word to judge, because we do have a tendency to think that this word always means something, of ugliness. Well, that's not necessarily true. In fact, I'm going to suggest by clicking on this word that, in fact, that's not what it means, at least not in its fullness. As you can see, it means to judge, to decide. That's what it means. It's a word that you would use, for example, whether in a court of law or privately, sometimes with cognate nouns emphasizing the notion of the verb I decide, including, note, I think it good. See, a judgment doesn't have to be net negative all the time. If people are operating righteously in faith, then the judgment is, I think it good. See, it can be net positive is what I'm saying. And that's the definition of the word. So when we hear judgment, particularly biblically, people have a tendency to automatically assume it's all ugliness, but that's not so. God is a righteous judge. He's not going to harm innocent people. So it's properly to separate or to distinguish, right? Judge, come to a choice, decision, judgment by making a judgment either positive, a verdict in favor of, or negative, which rejects or condemns, right? And so much like when we, for example, as you know, I love the the accountability that Stand for Thee is taking, for example, what are we doing, or what are they trying to do? They're trying to say, well, but you're accountable for your actions, though, right? So we do seek proper judgment. And of course, we seek it through law and peacefully, of course. But we are talking now in first century and Roman Empire type of ruling, as well as Israel making deals at the time. And let's not forget what they said, right? We have no king but Caesar. At that moment, they confessed that their king was this tyrannical Roman Empire. And that's why the judgment that came upon Israel, other than the people who were warned by Jesus to leave, they survived indeed, because they heeded Christ's warnings. They believed him. And when they saw the Roman army, as it says in Luke 21, come around to compass Jerusalem, they left. All right. So I just wanted to show you that the word judgment doesn't have to mean net negative. It is going to be according to whether they were doing things positively or negatively. If they were oppressing and harming innocent people, net negative. If they were not doing that, net positive. All right. So I just wanted to make sure we saw that. All right. And I also wanted to touch upon, as I always like to, time statements. All right. To show you that the historical view, I think, is very, very valid and makes a lot of sense. So, for example, here in Hebrews 10, verse 37, the writer of Hebrews, who I believe to be Paul, writes, "For yet a little while, and he that shall come and will not tarry." So I would ask you to ask yourself, this is written in the first century. If you were someone in around 50 AD, 60 AD reading this, would you think it was going to be 2,000 years and counting? I'm going to suggest to you, you would not think that at all. You would think it was going to be within a reasonable time, because it says, "For yet a little while, and he that shall come and will not tarry." So I'm going to actually take you to Revelation chapter 17, and I'm doing this to prove a point. The people with the whom I love very much, I'm not saying they're bad people. They've just been taught something potentially, and much like I was, but I don't mind telling you, I used to read this section and I could never answer this question. I could never answer who these people were in Revelation chapter 17. I'm going to suggest to you that this chapter, along with a few others, dates the book of Revelation prior to 70 AD. The people in the futurist camp will say that no, the book of Revelation was written in 90 AD. All right. So let's take that look, or point of view, and ask the question. Are you ready? Here it is. And I want you to think about it, by the way. If you happen to be a futurist or a person in eschatology, or you've heard people in eschatology saying the book of Revelation is in the future, you're allowed to ask yourself or them and ask them the question, because I asked myself when I had the futurist position, I could never answer it. So here it is. This is what John writes. "And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads," and he's describing this beast that he saw in a vision, "are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings." All right. So these 7 mountains, by the way, they are 7 kings. All right. So you're already seeing some idiomatic language, by the way. When you see mountains, he's often talking about kings and kingdoms. That's what those mean. That being said, these kings, there's 7 of them. John writes, 5 are fallen. That's past tense. Therefore, someone in the futurist position, I would offer this. Who are they? Who are they? Who are the 5 that have fallen? Who are they? Because see, John is writing this, according to the futurists, in around 90 AD. Well, these 5 have already fallen. So who are they? They should be in history somewhere, right? And they can't be popes. Why? Because there was no Catholic Church yet. See? So guessing that these are fallen popes of some kind is not going to be accurate, right? See, that's past tense. Then John writes, "And one is." That means present tense. That's an active king at the time. So who's that? because John is writing this according to the futurist in 90 AD. I'm going to suggest again, it's not 90, it's prior to 70 AD. And of course, he continues and he writes, and the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. So this is the position of the futurist. You have to keep guessing who all these people are. You have to keep guessing. And I don't mind saying, all of the folks who have been guessing ever since I've been alive and looking at this, which is a fairly young age, they've been wrong all along. So they keep guessing and they keep being wrong. And the problem with that is it causes people to just be unstable. What happens when I look at it historically? Well, allow me to, I'm going to click on, maybe it's this one, right? There we go. Oh, no, it's not that one either. Hold on. One more. Hold on. That's the one I was looking for. And I'm just going to read you the answer from an historical point of view. The 5 that are fallen, I can tell you who I believe they are. Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Tiberius Caesar, Caligula Caesar, which often is called Gaius, by the way, and Claudius Caesar. Those were the 5 that fell by 54 AD when Nero showed up. All right? The one that is Nero. That's who the one that is. I sounded a little like Bill Clinton there. So Nero, by the way, in Jewish gematria, Nero Caesar in Jewish gematria is 666. So he's the one that is. And the one that is coming, but has to reign for a short space, Galba. He reigned for 4 months. See, there's your answer. When you look at it historically, the answers are lined up perfectly. It's already there. When you go future, you're guessing the whole time. So I just wanted to show you this book of Tacitus here. And I'm just going to show you really quick, just the introduction area. But you can see there's Augustus. So prior to Augustus was Julius Caesar, of course. So there's Augustus, and he talks about Augustus. And then you got Tiberius here, who was the next one that fell. And then, of course, you have, just scrolling through here, guys, kind of on the fly, just to show you, you're going to see real quick. There's Claudius right there, right? Did we get Caligula in there, or Gaius? I think he's in there somewhere. All right. And then you have, so after Claudius, there's Nero, for example. All right. And then interestingly enough, as you roll through this, look what it says in the title. It says the short reign of Galba. That's exactly what it says in the book of Revelation, chapter 17. So I would urge you to take a look at the book of Tacitus for some historical information and see how that lines up with the book of Revelation. All right. So with all of that said, I'm now going to go into Revelation chapter 8. I think it's time to dig in. And let's take a look at what Revelation chapter 8 has to say. And I think you're going to see how this marries with a lot of Old Testament material. So I'm going to handle 1 to 5 for this round, okay? And it says, and when he had opened the 7th seal, and that's Christ, there was silence in heaven about the space of an half hour. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. All right. So first thing we're going to do is discuss this silence about a half an hour. So really brief, I'll run down what the priests used to do, what they were instructed to do as Levitical priests. All right. This routine would take them about a half an hour. And they would go to the altar of sacrifice, grab the coals of fire from the altar of sacrifice, and then go behind the veil, if I recall correctly, and then they would take it to the altar of incense. And they would offer this while the people were praying outside. All right. So when you see this silence in heaven, it marries up to their Levitical priesthood routine. All right. So you're going to start to see why God had them doing these things in the physical to manifest what is happening in the spiritual. And by the way, think of a Jewish person reading this in the first century. They would know, because they would do this once a year. They would know this, just like you would know Passover, or you would know Christmas, right? They did this yearly. This was a yearly event. All right, so let's go to take a look at Joshua 6. You're going to see some similarities in Joshua 6. And this was when they took down the walls of Jericho. And so why you are seeing the similar analogies here is because the walls of the Temple Mount of Jerusalem were now going to come down. See, this was a historical judgment upon Jericho at the time, but now this was going to be happening in Jerusalem. And it says here, and Joshua had commanded the people, saying, you shall not shout. See, he's telling them to be quiet, right? Nor make any noise with your voice, neither shall any word proceed out of your mouth until the day I bid you shout. Then shall you shout. See, silence in heaven for half an hour. That's another thing giving you the picture. And as you can see, as it continues, so the ark of the Lord compassed the city, going about at once, and they came into the camp and lodged in the camp. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord, and 7 priests. See how historically you can see that and go, well, wait a minute, 7 angels, 7 priests, right? He's giving you the shadows of what's actually going to be happening in the future and what's happening in the heavenlies. The 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets, as you can see, of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord went on continually and blew with the trumpets. And the armed men went before them, but the reward came after the ark of the Lord, the priests going on and blowing with the trumpets. So again, as you can see, this marries up really nicely with Revelation chapter 8. So always try to put yourself in the first century mindset. You have to consider who this is written to. It's to them and for them. That's good hermeneutics, but it's for us because we can glean like you can glean from any historical things. Much like, for example, with law, we go to precedents, correct? We go to history. Correct? Same idea here, except this would be teaching us spiritual things, of course. Now, in the Levitical priesthood, you'll see a lot of similarities, again, of what's happening between verse 1 and 5 in the book of Revelation 8 and how it's marrying up to fulfill the old covenant law so that we can be ushered into the new covenant of grace and truth under Christ, who's already seated at the right hand of the Father. So I've often said this, if the old covenant is not fulfilled, then we're not under the new covenant. But if the old covenant is fulfilled, and I say that it is, for sure by 70 AD, then indeed we're in the new covenant of grace and truth. And in Leviticus 16, so again, this is Old Testament, Old Covenant, you're going to see what the priesthood had to do here. And he shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from off the altar before the Lord, and his hands full of sweet incense, as you can see, beaten small, and bring it within the veil. And he shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that is upon the testimony, that he die not. So this is also including a salvation mark here, by the way. I believe that the incense, I'm going to be able to prove, at least to some degree, that I believe the incense is the Spirit of God purifying our prayers, if you will, before they go up to God. And I'm going to try to lend a couple scriptures to point in that direction. Because you're, as mentioned here, right, these burning coals of fire, fire is a purifier, right? And then, of course, the incense, I think, is a motif, if you will, and he's running this to show them that the Spirit will intercede and also purify these prayers that are offered. All right. And then I'm going to take you to Luke 1. So now we're into the New Testament. Keeping all that in mind, I'm going to bring you to verses 5 to 11. This is Zacharias, by the way. And Zacharias is John the Baptist's dad. But of course, John the Baptist is not born at this point yet. And John the Baptist's dad, Zacharias, was a priest, and he had the privilege and honor, which, by the way, only happened once a year, and I think it was just one time to a priest. So they waited for this privilege, and this was his year to go in to the temple to run this particular instruction that they were asked and required to do. And I'm going to start in verse 5. It says, "There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias," which, if I recall correctly, that name means his oath. And Elizabeth means God remembers. So as a couple, you could double check me on this, but as a couple, I think it's God remembers his oath. That would be Elizabeth in the Hebrew and Zacharias in the Hebrew. So I'm pretty sure that's the deal there. And so this priest, Zacharias of the course of Abia, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron. So that's the Levitical priesthood, of course, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God. I'm going to, push this a little side note about how there's times where you see a scripture and you'll roll right by it without noting something. Notice that this scripture is saying that they were both righteous before God. And we have a scripture, I believe it's in Romans, where Isaiah is being quoted by Paul, where Isaiah is saying, "None are righteous, no, not one." And there's an entire interpretation based on that. And I'm going to suggest to you, well, here's the problem. This is saying they're both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. So I guess there are two that are righteous. Do you see? So either the writer of Romans, which is Paul, is wrong, or Luke is wrong. They can't both be right. That's not true. They can both be right. Because if you take audience relevance and time relevance, who was Isaiah talking to? See what happens when you don't put audience relevance and time relevance? Then all of a sudden you're condemning the entire human race. No, that's not who Isaiah was talking to. Isaiah was primarily speaking to the folks who had the power, the leadership at the time of Israel. That's who he was speaking to. And that's why Paul is quoting that quote, to remind them that that the higher ups, right, are not righteous just because they're performing the law. So that's the audience relevance there. And that's what he was trying to communicate. And Isaiah was not condemning the entire human race. He wasn't talking about 6-month-old babies or 89-year-old widows that are praying and fasting in the temple on a regular basis. That's not who he was talking to. See, we might even walk into a room these days, like the parliament or something, and go, none of you are righteous. No, not one of you. And if you take that quote and apply it into the entire world, well, you've really managed to make a big boo-boo there. And it's all because you're not taking into account who he was talking to at the time. He wasn't talking to the entire world. He was talking to a specific group. And when we do that, and so was Paul. So was Paul when he was writing the book of Romans. He was writing to a specific group that needed to understand you can't perform the law and think because you're doing the law, you're righteous before God. That was the point. And so I'm going to ask you yourself, take this scripture, do what you got to do with it, but it's very clear. So I know that this is a side note, but I like to take these opportunities to note that this is specifically saying that these two folks were righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. And that's what it says. So if that's what it says, then that's got to be true. And they had no child because that Elizabeth was barren, and they both were now well stricken in years. And it came to pass that while he executed the priest's office, all right? So I want you to really tone in on that Zacharias is executing the priest's office before God in the order of his course, according to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. All right. And as you'll see in verse 10, it says, and the whole multitude of the people were praying without, which in the Old English means outside, at the time of incense. So people are praying outside while he goes in to do his positioning and his lot of burning the incense with the coals of fire from the altar of sacrifice and bringing it to the altar of incense. So notice the prayers with the incense. All right. And there appeared unto him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. All right. So I wanted you to see that. And I'm going to quickly roll down to verse 21 to point this out to you about, remember that space about a half an hour? You'll see that here. I think there's a good inference. It says, and the people waited for Zacharias, and they marveled that he tarried so long in the temple. See, they were used to this rudiment, and according to my studies, this rudiment would normally take about a half an hour. Well, in this case, he was taking longer because he was met by Gabriel, and there was a situation in there. So people were outside going, hey, like, what's going on? What's taking him so long? All right. So let's take that, and then I'm going to ask my good brother Damaduch, to go to Romans 8:26. And I want to show you how the incense is representing the purification of the prayers. And I do want people to be encouraged to pray, because sometimes we do pray, and let's face it, I'm sure you feel like me sometimes, like, man, I don't even know if I'm saying this right, right? Well, I have some good news for you here. In Romans 8:26, Paul writes, likewise the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings, which cannot be uttered. All right. So I'm going to suggest to you that's a pretty good inference, that the incense and the Spirit is a motif. And that's why he ran that, because as we pray, sometimes we don't know what to pray. Well, we pray it up, and then God has the Spirit purify it. He receives it. And I'm also going to suggest to you that this may indeed be imprecatory prayers. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm going to review Revelation chapter 8 again with you there, just to show you how, now that you've kind of taken that in, you're seeing this seventh seal. There's a silence about a half an hour, right? And by the way, I do like to call this the calm before the storm, by the way. And I saw the seven angels which stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. Think what the Israelite would be reading this in the first century. They would think of Joshua immediately and the walls of Jericho coming down. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers. See that? The prayers of the saints. This is all attached to the old covenant Israel. Old covenant Israel. That's all attached to that. All right? Which further, as far as I'm concerned, timestamps it in the first century, by the way, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne, and the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And we've talked about this word earth. Earth is gi. It's a region. So it could be, for example, could have been in Jerusalem. It could have been in Bethsaida. It could have been in Chorazin. See? It's not the entire cosmos, and it's not even the entire Roman known world. It's the word gi. And I will take a minute to show you that. And then, of course, it says there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. So let's go to the Strongs here real quick and see if we can't gather up that word for us, just to kind of verify, if you will, that that's, again, it's a judgment in specific areas at the time. So that, again, it kind of takes away that idea or that positioning that this is some kind of, entire explosion of the entire earth from, one end of heaven to the other. And so I've shown this many times. This word is gi, and it's 1093. And again, I will just show you it means earth, land, soil, region, country, inhabitants of a region. So oftentimes, even when it's saying into the earth, it's talking about even the inhabitants of that location. And as you can see, Matthew 2:6, land of Judah, not the entire earth, right? Into the land of Israel, for example. So that's the word consistently being shown in the book of Revelation, which further tells you it's very zoned to a specific location. All right. So if this was a judgment on Canada, for example, it could be, this is happening in Ontario, or even just specifically Toronto, or just, Ottawa and Belleville. I don't know, but it's regions. There's regions. And that's why even Jesus, we'll try to get there today, where he talks about woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Capernaum, right? Those are areas of Israel, right? So if we understand that, we get away from this idea that it's some kind of, Will Smith movie. All right. And I think, again, it time stamps it. Now, I also want to show you here that it's being cast into the earth. This is the response, because as I mentioned in the fifth seal, I believe this is the response, because remember, they say, how long, O Lord? And he says, just a little while, till your other brothers and sisters who will unfortunately be martyred like you, once they've come in and all these imprecatory prayers come in, then I'm going to pronounce judgment. Those who do good will be fine. I'm going to protect my people. Those who have been conducting this wickedness, they're going to have a problem, right? So that's the deal. And so let me take you to, I'm going to take you to Psalm 69. I'm going to ask my good brother Dom to put Psalm and hit 69 for me, if you don't mind. And we're going to read from 20 to 28. I'm going to show you an example of an imprecatory prayer where God's people are weeping and being harmed, and they're crying out for God to help. And we are indeed allowed to ask God to intervene. And so if there's some kind of tyranny in our country, we are allowed to ask God to take care of that problem for us and guide us and help us, right, to do the right thing. And of course, I think we should always do it peacefully. That being said, we do have to stand in the gap, right? And we have to trust, and he will see us through it, right? And we have to tell people, look, we got to fight against the tyranny peacefully, of course. And so that's an imprecatory prayer. You're praying for the righteous judgment of God to stay the evil, right? And bring in the good. So take it for verse 20. The psalmist writes, reproach hath broken my heart, and I am full of heaviness. And I looked for some to take pity, but there was none, and for comforters, but I found none. They gave me also gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. Let their table become a snare before them, and that which should have been for their welfare, let it become a trap. Let their eyes be darkened, that they see not, and make their loins continually to shake. Pour out thine indignation upon them, and let thy wrathful anger take hold of them. Let their habitation be desolate. See the language there? And none dwell in their tents, for they persecute him whom thou hast smitten, and they talk to the grief of those whom thou hast wounded. Add iniquity unto their iniquity, and let them not come into thy righteousness. Let them be blotted out of the book of the living, and not be written with the righteous. So these are what we call imprecatory prayers. And I don't mind telling you that this to me sounds, because Christ, remember when they offered him vinegar to drink. So this is prophetic in that act, I think. But to stay on topic of imprecatory prayer, I'm going to give you just one more. And Psalm 5. Just hit 5 for me, bro. Oh, that says 25. All right. Thanks, bro. All right. Verse 4 to 10, we're going to take a look. It says, "For thou art not a God that hath pleasure in wickedness, neither shall evil dwell with thee. The foolish shall not stand in thy sight. Thou hatest all workers of iniquity." By the way, words like hate, you're allowed to hate iniquity. We're supposed to see love and hate are not opposites. I hate to see an old lady get mugged. It's okay to hate that. We should hate that. See? The opposite of love is fear. And this is another reason why I think it's really important for us to understand that the book of Revelation is historic, because if they keep telling us it's, around the corner, we're always thinking, right, that God's going to let us have it, even though we really haven't, and I don't mind telling you, I understand there's definitely some wickedness here, but I've met some amazing people through this process, and they're not doing anything wicked as far as I know. I can speak for my brother Dominic here. He's doing wonderfully. I mean, he's been a great friend and brother to me for the last few years for sure. So I don't want anything horrible happening to him, right? So, but again, if we're always thinking we're about to, go through some horrible apocalyptic situation, it freezes us, puts us in fear, and then we don't actually react to what God's asking us to do. So I think this is very important for us to understand that it's historical. Right? So in that, we hate iniquity. We hate harming children, for example. We hate that. And that's not bad. Fear is the opposite of love. We got to remember that. And he says, "Thou shalt destroy them that speak leasing." That means speak carelessly. I believe what that means. "The Lord will abhor the bloody and deceitful man." Okay. So recognize, guys, this isn't just some guys, hanging around the casino a little too long here. Okay. These are people that are really doing very, very harmful things. Heavy deceit, murders in the deal. All right. "But as for me, I will come into thy house in the multitude of thy mercy, and in thy fear will I worship toward thy holy temple. Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness because of mine enemies. Make thy way straight before my face." This is where, keep me straight no matter what evil they throw out at me. Don't, I just want to stay straight. So guide me, give me that light. Let me follow that. Let me stay on that straight path. I don't want to get sucked into how they operate. "For there is no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward part is very wickedness. Their throat is an open sepulchre. They flatter with their tongue." See, this is a they. This is a specific group, by the way. This also gets quoted in Romans. But this they is a specific group of people that have certain degrees of positions and powers. And they're using those powers to harm innocent people. That's what's going on here. "Destroy thou them." See, they're saying, "God, please take care of this problem. Oh God, let them fall by their own counsels." See that? Let them have a taste of their own medicine. "Cast them out in the multitude of their transgressions, for they have rebelled against thee." And by the way, you know what this implies? Well, I'm going to assure you that this is, it's a psalm. So obviously this is in the time of Old Covenant Israel. You can't rebel directly against God in Old Covenant times because it's Israel. At the time, he was the God of Israel. All things had not been unveiled yet. The mystery of Christ had not been unveiled. So this rebellion is speaking specifically to the powers of Israel at the time, not today's Israel. I'm not talking about modern day Israel. I'm talking about historic Israel. And they, meaning there's a solid group, leadership, including oftentimes chief priests, that were behaving in corruption. And we can relate to that, can't we? In the last few years, I think we can relate to that. And that's why the psalmist is saying they have rebelled against you. It's his own people there in the context. All right. So I'm going to move forward now. I think I've proven that the reason why you sing these prayers, go up, be purified, it comes out of the angel's hands, God receives them. There's a space of half an hour. Now he responds to bring net positive to his people and net negative to those who were harming innocent folks in the time of the first century. All right, so let's go to Revelation chapter 8 one more time here and continue on. It says, "And the seven angels which had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. And they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up." All right, so this is where I'm going to start introducing some pretty heavy stuff here. But when you see hail and fire and blood, think of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And Egypt, right? And that's the idiom here. It's judgment. That's the idiom. And when it talks about the third part of the trees, yes, indeed, this can be manifested physically. So I'm going to take you to the book of Josephus here. And I'm going to show you, this is book 6, by the way. And it's in chapter 1. And it says, real quick, by the way, a little right-hand idiom going on in the book of Josephus. He's a Jewish writer. And he's talking about what's happening in the first century in and around that 66 to 70 AD time. It says, "But as they had their right hands already polluted with murders of their own countrymen." This is that civil war that I was talking about. Notice he uses the idiom of the right hand. See? That they didn't kill people with the left hand? No. This is an idiom, the right hand. It's who are you walking with? Who are you following? What are your actions? Who are you imitating? See, that's the idiom there. But we're going to continue here because I want to show you here. It says, here we go. It says, "And now the Romans," right here, "although they were greatly distressed in getting together their materials, raised their banks in 21 days, after they had cut down all the trees that were in the country." Okay, so you're seeing some physical manifestation of what you're seeing in Revelation chapter 8, written in the book of Josephus. And he qualifies this. He continues. He says, "All the trees that were in the country that adjoined to the city, and that for 90 furlongs round about. As I have already related, and truly the very view itself of the country was a melancholy thing." See, it's being de-beautified. It's collapsing. It's not because the sun is falling from the sky. It's because order is out of whack now. You have a civil war, as we've talked about before. So now here we go. We've got some serious problems. And of course, when that happens, it affects economy. It affects the food. It affects lots of fear with the people. This type of thing is what's happening in the first century. And he continues and says, "And truly the very view itself of the country was a melancholy thing, for those places which were before adorned with trees and pleasant gardens were now become a desolate country." This is exactly what Jesus said in Matthew 23 was going to happen to them. Exactly what he said. And you have a qualifying historian saying 40 years after Jesus said it, within that generation, that this is exactly what ended up happening to the place. And look what he continues to say. He says, "And its trees were all cut down, nor could any foreigner that had formerly seen Judea and the most beautiful suburbs of the city, and now saw it as a desert, but lament and mourn sadly at so great a change. For the war had laid all the signs of beauty quite waste." See, God's removing the beauty and the splendor of this great mountain. That's what he's doing here in judgment because of all the wickedness. Let's not forget what they did to Christ himself, the whipping, the scourging. Should I continue? Even after being pronounced innocent 3 times by the governor of Rome. And as it continues here, it says, "But lament and mourn sadly at so great a change, for the war had laid all the signs of beauty quite waste, nor if anyone that had known the place before had come on a sudden to it now would have known it again." In other words, if someone had been there before and then went there again, they wouldn't even recognize the place, because it says, but though he were at the city itself, yet would he have inquired for it notwithstanding. In other words, he could be actually standing in the city and he'd be going, hey, where's Judea? Can you point me? I must have got lost. That's how the change was that immense. That's how huge this change was. This is written, and this is also qualified by the book of Tacitus, which is a Roman writer. He's, I believe, if I recall correctly, I think he's European of some kind. So he's not Jewish. So you have a Jewish man, Jewish historian writing. This is exactly what's happening in the first century AD. And then you have the same thing being written by someone who's not Jewish, saying the same thing, qualifying everything that Jesus said was going to happen. And it all happened within that generation, just like he said it would. And this is exactly what's being read in the book of Revelation. All right, so as I said, it's now a response to those precatory prayers. Imprecatory prayers, I think that's the proper enunciation. And then it says, so the other thing we're going to talk about is trees also. Okay, so there's the physical manifestation. All right, so let me take a little time with this, because I think this is really important for us to understand that sometimes when he's talking about trees and grass, he's actually talking about people. All right, so there's literal. I think I just showed you some of the literal, but there's also spiritual literal. All right, it's literal, but it's spiritual literal. This is still a spiritual visage, if you will, right? So let me take you to some spots here that I think might be very helpful to us. So let's go here to math. Let's try, you know what, bro? Let's try, I just want to see. Oh yeah. Let's go with, Luke 23. All right. And I'm just going to fly down. I went over this last week, but I want to show you what he says in 31, because I had stopped. So this is when he's on his way to his crucifixion, and these women of Jerusalem are lamenting. And as you can see, and in verse 28, Jesus turned unto them and said, and remember, keep audience relevance and timeline relevance. He says, daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Why does he say that? Well, because he knows what's coming. And as he continues, he says, for behold, the days are coming in the which they shall say, blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bear and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. I see a lot of idiom in here, but look what he says here. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? Do you see what he's saying there? I'm going to suggest to you what he's saying is, because he was there running a ministry. There was John the Baptist. People were getting baptized. They were repenting of their wickedness. Even tax collectors were starting to pay people back what they ripped them off for. Jesus was healing people, right? Preaching the true words of God, right? Bringing grace and truth. Correct? He was doing all, that's a green tree. He was fertilizing this green tree. But now they're actually in that same time frame, this is what they're doing to a green tree. He says, what do you think they're going to do in a dry? Do you see the idiom that he's using there? I hope you do. Here's another one. Let's go with one of my favorites, of course, Matthew 15. Thanks, brother. And I'm just going to take you real quick to 12 to 14 here, because he offends the Pharisees, because this is one of those deals where they had a purity law, and Jesus is like, yeah, your purity laws are nonsense. And in verse 12, the disciples come up to him. As you can see, they came his disciples and said unto him, knowest thou that the Pharisees were offended after they heard this saying? What does Jesus say back? He doesn't apologize. He says, every plant which my heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted up. Do you see that? He refers to them as vegetation. And he says, if they're not my Father's plants, they just get rooted up. That's the deal there. So now let's also go to another idiom where he's pointing out that people can be vegetation in the idioms of God. So let's go with Jude, bro. I think it's actually just one, because there's only one chapter in that. There you go. Verse 12, you're going to see that Jude uses the same type of motif language that he learned, correct, as being a Jewish man reading the Old Testament, right? And he uses the same type of idiom language that God taught them. And in verse 12, he says, these are spots in your feasts of charity. And he's talking about people that really are essentially false prophets, false teachers, causing, grief and problems, not showing the true love and grace of God. And he says, when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear, they are clouds, they are without water, carried about of winds. Look what he calls them, trees whose fruit withereth. Without fruit, they are twice dead, and they are plucked up by the roots. The same idea, plucked up by the roots, which, by the way, I'm going to suggest again, these terms do not sound like torture chamber type of idioms. They sound like you cease to exist. When you pluck up a plant, it's not continuing to be tortured. It's just finished. All right. So I leave that with you. But as you can see, the main thing I want you can see, he's using fruit and trees, right? And plucked up by the roots. And he's talking about people. Here he was talking about Cain, Balaam, and Korah, all figures in the Old Testament. They're people he was talking about there. All right. Now, I'm going to take you to a location here that I think is important. I think if I got this right, well, you probably already know about I'm going to take you to Matthew 21. That's what I'm going to take you to. Sorry, bro. I'll let you take it from there. Matthew 21. I want you to see what Jesus says here, because then I'm going to also show you some mountain language and what that really means as well. And it might be a little too early, but try to hold on to this if you can, or walk with me on this. So Jesus is walking and says, now in the morning, as he returned into the city, he hungered. And when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it and found nothing thereon but leaves only. So as you can see, it has leaves, right? He comes to it, looks fairly healthy on the outside, and said unto it, let no fruit grow on thee, right? He says, henceforward forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, how soon is this fig tree withered away? Now, most theologians agree that the fig tree is an idiom for specifically the nation of Israel. And if you go to Jeremiah, it talks about the figs and the fig tree, and it seems to be an idiom for Israel. We'll just continue here. As you can see, it withered away quickly, didn't it? Well, what happened in 70 AD? Jesus answered and said unto them, verily I say unto you, if you have faith and doubt not, you shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree. Pause for a moment. Who wants to be, have the power? Hey, Dom, what are you doing tonight? After the show here, after the Bible study, we can go around cursing fig trees. I don't think that's the intention of what Christ is teaching them. You see, if you hang on to the idiom that trees can represent nations, peoples, constructs, governmental people in influential positions, if you hold on to that idiom, that's, I believe, why he's doing this. He's trying to show them that they can shake up the powers, the earthly powers, if you will, by the power of the Spirit. But you have to have faith. You can actually, when he continues here, he's not talking about a physical mountain. I'm going to try to set out to prove this to you. He says, but also if you shall say unto this mountain, and notice he says this mountain, he's near the Temple Mount of Israel, where the temple is. He's talking about this mountain, and he means it. He's not just talking about any mountain in, Denver, Colorado. He's talking about the mountain, the Temple mountain. That's what he's talking about. And he says, and if you have the faith and don't doubt, and you say unto this mountain, very specific mountain, be thou removed and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done. Don't picture a real mountain floating up, okay? This is not a Matrix movie. You're not trying to bend a spoon with your eye. He's talking about through the Spirit, right? You can move mountains, right? This is in motif that God uses. You can shake up the powers. You can change what's happening, right? You can shake this up. And you can take down, which, by the way, Israel did come down, and the preaching of the gospel of Christ was one of the things that really got the Jewish folks at the time to start persecuting Christians. And then, of course, the zealots start to come in because a lot of folks are making deals. The Jewish folks are making deals with Caesar, and this starts civil unrest, correct? And then that brings in the Roman army, and here we go, you see? And it all kind of just sent a shockwave through, right? And it really starts with the preaching of the gospel of Christ Jesus, that spiritual kingdom that he started. Officially, by the way. And it continues here and says, "In all things whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, believing you shall receive." What he's teaching here is imprecatory prayer. See? And that's the part where I think that, Christians are missing this part. That we do, through prayer, right? God will bless our work. If there's tyranny, he says, stand in the gap. I'm with you, right? And as you notice in verse 23, and when he was come into the temple, and what did they say right away? The chief priests and the elders came unto him saying, hey, what authority do you have to do these things? See, but main thing I want to show you is we walked right into the temple. So what mountain was he talking about? All right. So I'm kind of giving you that before we move forward here to show you these mountain motifs, all right? So I'm going to take you to Jeremiah, and we're going to go Jeremiah 51, all right? And I'm going to focus here on verse 25. Thanks, bro. And look, he's talking about, this is Jeremiah. Most of Jeremiah is pronouncing judgment upon Israel, but towards the tail end of the book of Jeremiah, he's actually now pronouncing in advance judgment on Babylon, who starts getting carried away. And if you take a look here, he talks, it's now a judgment upon Babylon, all right? And he says, behold, the prophet says, but these are the words of God, of course. He says, I am against thee, O destroying mountain. See, mountains don't walk around destroying anything. See, this is apocalyptic language. This is motif language that God uses mountains, excuse me, as an idiom for kingdoms and kings and power structures. All right. And he says, I'm against you, destroying mountain, saith the Lord, which destroyest all the earth. And that would be a context where you're destroying all the earth. It's not because they're cutting down too many trees. It's the inhabitants of the earth. Remember that word gi, for example? It could be land or people who inhabit that land. He's destroying people. This kingdom is harming people. And he says, and I will stretch out mine hand upon thee and roll thee down from the rocks and will make thee a burnt mountain. See, mountains are typically what? Grand, majestic, right? That's the picture of them. He says, well, I'm going to burn you up. I'm going to make you a burnt up, desolate mountain. Do you see the idiom there? It doesn't have to be where he literally uses fire. There can be some literal fire used, but that's not the whole point of the idiom and the motif. Right? And by the way, as he continues a little bit here, I'll show you a few things because he's pronouncing this judgment, right? It says, and they shall not take of thee a stone for a corner, nor a stone for foundations, but thou shalt be desolate forever. See what he's saying? Once again, he says, I'm going to bring you down. And how does he do that? You'll see. So he says, set you up a standard in the land, blow the trumpet among the nations. All right, so pay attention. So we got some trumpets blowing here, right? Now, this is not the final Feast of Trumpet. I'm just trying to show you that he's already giving the pattern of the motif prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, and the Jewish people would know these motifs. They would know it. And we should too, because we have the Old Testament, and we can learn how God speaks historically. And he says, notice he says, blow the trumpet among the nations, plural, prepare the nations against her. See, he's taking these nations over here and he's going to bring them against Babylon. That's what he's doing. And this is what brings in the Medes and Persian Empire. See? So God uses these empires or these nations to come against this one. This is historic, of course. Now look at Roman Empire. Same thing. He moves Roman Empire to go against Israel for all the things they had done. And that's why Jesus said, all the blood from righteous Abel all the way to Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you slew between the altar and the temple, all that blood is going to be upon this generation's head. Matthew 23. That's what he's talking about. That's why it's first century history here that we're, so we can learn these motifs. And so, of course, he talks about the kingdoms coming and he says, prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes. So what's after the Babylonian Empire? Medo-Persian. That's what's next. All right. And notice again, some of this motif language, and the land shall tremble. See, it's the land. It's not, now there could be an earthquake, but it doesn't have to mean that. It's that the land is going to tremble. The people are going to go, uh-oh, what's going on? What's happening? Right. And just, try if you can use even the recent few years. Like we knew some problems, like what's going on here with this, what do you mean muzzles? What do you mean I'll get fired if I don't, some issues, right? That kind of thing. Right. Now, don't get me wrong. I think this was much worse. I'm not trying to suggest that we suffered as bad, but I'm saying we can use these motifs to understand the book of Revelation and realize that it is indeed historical. And we can use that language the way God used it. For every purpose of the Lord shall be performed against Babylon to make the land of Babylon a desolation without an inhabitant. All right. So I'm going to go down to show you. So there's that burnt mountain. See how that reference is? You're going to see that in the book of Revelation. I'm going to show you quick 42 to 43. I wanted to pick up some stuff here. The sea is come up upon Babylon. So who's the sea? Do you really think it's the actual water coming up? You can if you want, but I'm going to suggest to you, he's already told you it's the nations. See, so the nations are the sea in this idiom. See, it's like a flood, right? But the flood doesn't have to actually be physical water. It can actually be these nations that are coming against Babylon, and it's an idiom, it's motif, right? She is covered with the multitude of the waves thereof. See, her cities are a desolation. See, they're dried out, so it's dry and wet. No. He's talking about these nations and all kinds of armies surrounding and taking down Babylon. And it says a dry land and a wilderness, right? A land wherein no man dwelleth, neither doth any son of man pass thereby, right? So it's a desolation. It's being de-beautified. Okay, that type of language is what's going on. It's falling apart. That's what's going on there. 60 to 64, same type of vibes here. And this is really interesting too, because Jeremiah writes all this stuff in a book. And all this evil stuff that's going to come upon them, he writes in a book, and that they should come upon Babylon. So Jeremiah wrote in a book, I'll just read it, all the evil that should come upon Babylon, even all these words that are written against Babylon. And Jeremiah said to Sariah, when thou comest to Babylon and shalt see and shalt read all these words, then shalt thou say, O Lord, thou hast spoken against this place to cut it off, that none shall remain in it, neither man nor beast, but that it shall be desolate forever. And it shall be, when thou hast made an end of reading this book, that thou shalt bind a stone to it and cast it into the midst of Euphrates River. See? Throw it in the water. So here's the book, here's a rock, tie them together and throw them in there. And then you're going to say this, thus shall Babylon sink and shall not rise from the evil that I will bring upon her, and they shall be weary. All right, so he's pronouncing, and if you read a little bit about the king of Babylon, what he started to do, it was pretty horrendous material, right? So we got to remember, this is history, right? And so this wickedness, God decided, well, Babylon's getting carried away, lifting herself too high, and so we're going to have to take care of this because now they're being like extremely, extremely cruel. All right, so I think we're picking up some of this mountain motif. I'm going to grab a little bit more in the book of Daniel for my brothers on it. And we actually reviewed this in the Daniel video. And, well, let's go with 2, bro. All right, we'll go verse 35. And this was the vision that Daniel was given. All right. And we reviewed this. There is a video more thorough about this, but you'll see that this mountain motif is describing the kingdom. Then was the iron, the clay, and the brass, and the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. All right, so this stone that smashed the image, which is a motif of Christ, right? Because he's our chief cornerstone, comes and smashes that final fourth empire, which was the Roman Empire, as far as I'm concerned, which we know happened, right? And you're going to see the mountain motif. And then, of course, in 44 to 45, it says, and in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. But it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Spiritual kingdoms can stand forever. Physical ones never do. For as much as thou sawest the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, see, and again, it's without hands. A stone cut without hands, not with hands, without them, because it's spiritual. And notice it's cut out of the mountain, and that it break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, and the silver, and the gold. The great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. All right, so you're seeing the mountain to the kingdom. You're seeing that motif happening there. And so now let's go to, you know what? I think I have it right here, Revelation 17. But just do me a favor. Just erase the numbers there for me, bro, and pop her in there. All right. I'm going to take you to 15 because I'm going to show you some more. Now he uses also the waters. So plant life, vegetation, mountains, and even the waters are actually idioms oftentimes for people. So again, I'm going to repeat, there can be some literal manifestations or physical manifestations of what happened in the first century, of course, but it still doesn't change that there's a spiritual literal. All right, so we can widen our minds to the vision, because this is a spiritual vision that John has been given here. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Waters are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So much like in Jeremiah, when he says the sea is going to come, flooding up upon you, he's talking about the peoples, the multitudes, the nations, and the tongues. And I apologize, someone might have a mute button they might have to hit for me if you don't mind. So as you can see, waters isn't always just water, right? It's oftentimes a situation where it's talking about people and nations, multitudes, and tongues. All right. So when you see sea or when you see rivers or fountains of waters, it's not always, so don't take it too literal. That doesn't mean that because there's lots of accounts in the book of Tacitus how there was dead bodies in the water, right? And there was blood in the water, right? So there's going to be physical manifestations of the spiritual vision, absolutely. But don't think of it as limited to that. Right? So waters are referred to as peoples because it's part of God's motif language that he gives us. All right. So when you're seeing this, right, and it says, and the second angel, I'll start here again, right? Now that you have all this motif in your head, right, and he talks about the third part of trees that were burnt up and all grass was burnt up. See, he's not talking about we already talked about that, how earth is a region. And I'm going to suggest to you that this region is different than the region that's coming up in Revelation chapter 9. And how am I going to prove that to you? Well, I can go to Revelation chapter 9 real quick, because here he says all the grass is burnt, correct? All right. Well, now over here, you're going to see him say to these, in the spiritual vision, there's these locusts that come out, and it says, it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth. You see? Well, wait a minute. You said you burnt it all in chapter 8. And over here you're saying, don't touch the grass. But if you understand the word gi, right? It's like, okay, we're going to burn all the grass in Toronto. Oh, but not leave the grass alone in Ottawa. See, that's what's going on here. It's regional situations. It's not necessary, right? It's regional. That's why the word gi is being used, not cosmos. Cosmos would be everywhere and everything, right? Not gi, it's regions, all right? And so in that, I'm going to use this in my travels here, and I'm going to bring you to Matthew to show you that there are pronunciations of judgment from Jesus. Go with Matthew 11, bro. And I just want to show you how he specifies certain locations. And just to show you that that's the deal, all right? Matthew 11, let's go 21. And he says, woe unto thee, Chorazin, woe unto thee, Bethsaida. So we briefly talked about this. For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon at the day of judgment than for you. And go ahead and Google images of Bethsaida. It's cooked. Chorazin, same thing. So does that mean it already happened? Yes. Why? Because this happened in the first century. That's why. Same thing with Capernaum. But when you Google those images, and again, short of going there yourselves, guys, what else can I say? But you have to, for Capernaum, you have to Google ancient Capernaum, not just Capernaum. All right. Once you Google ancient Capernaum, you'll see that it got toasted too, because stuff went down in the first century, logged in our historical books. And now Capernaum, which art exalted unto heaven. See that kind of motif again? Oh boy, Capernaum, aren't you? And this is Jesus speaking. He's using the same motif to say, oh boy, aren't you guys fancy? You're all the way up to heaven, are you? You think you're the highest above everybody, do you? He says, well, you're going to be brought down to hell. And by the way, this hell is the grave. That's the grave. It's not a lake of fire. It's the grave. For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained unto this day. But I say unto you that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for you. And he's talking about the judgment that comes from when the Roman Empire comes and takes down Israel and Jerusalem. All right, so I wanted to show you that part of the motif, all right, and that different regions, right? So in Revelation chapter 8, don't try not to get confused, because I know some people, well, what's going on here? Well, it's because he's talking about different regions. That's why. So in this area, okay, all the grass, right? And I don't mind telling you that grass as being vegetation, there could be a lot of people that are going to go down in this area. And then of course, some other area, don't touch the people here. It could also be, it could also mean that. I'll leave that interpretation with you. But what I know for sure is that this is following right along with the historical accounts of the book of Josephus and Tacitus. And that's the book of Revelation, specifically from chapter 1 to 19. So I'm going to continue here and go. It says, the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. So we've read enough motif. I'm going to suggest to you this great mountain is Israel. Okay? And they're being cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. All right? So this doesn't have to be like a literal blood in the sea, although again, with the dead bodies and things of this nature, absolutely. But again, it's meant for acknowledging that there's going to be a great war, if you will, happening in Israel. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. So quickly, I'm going to take you here to this real quick, because I think sometimes we don't realize that Israel it was an ancient port city. And, you know, you'll see things different now, but there was, if you look, like it was huge that for commerce. We didn't have back in the first century planes, trains, and automobiles, right? So it says, for example, here it talks about Jaffa. And it says, for many centuries, stretching back into antiquity, the port of Jaffa was the first entry point for people visiting the Holy Land. Traders, pilgrims, migrants all followed through the city and onwards to Jerusalem. right? And other cities across the region. It's one of the world's oldest ports, and it is mentioned in the Bible as the place from which Jonah set sail to Tarshish. All right. So why am I mentioning this? Well, this was a trading port. So when you go to Revelation here, chapter, oh, sorry, bro. Can you grab Revelation chapter 8 for me? When you go to this part, when he's talking about the ships that were destroyed, there could have been some physical ships being destroyed, but I'm going to suggest that this represents the merchandising and the trading, and therefore its economical downfall, sending a shockwave, not only to Israel. Now, this is going to start to spread into the known Roman world, right? Because this is a huge port. Historically, this was a big deal. All right. And a lot of those feasts and the Holy Land and that temple drew a lot of people for a lot of reasons, including Jewish people who lived in other areas. All right. So that's what and again, I'm going to show you some motif on when it says creatures. All right. So it could literally be creatures if you want to go with that, but I'm going to suggest to you, these are all motifs of people that are dying. All right. So what am I going to use for that as proof? Well, I'll take you to this, for example. Do me a favor, bro. Acts chapter 10. And Peter gets a vision to learn something. All right. And you're going to see here, starting in verse 9, it says, on the morrow as they went, and this is New Testament, book of Acts, on the morrow, as they went on their journey and drew near unto the city, Peter went up upon the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. And he became very hungry and would have eaten. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven opened, and a certain vessel descending upon him as it had been a great sheet knit at the four corners. So he's experiencing a vision, and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of four-footed beasts of the earth. By the way, these words, if I recall, they're all gi, and wild beasts and creeping things and fowls of the air. And there came a voice unto him, saying, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice spake unto him again the second time, What God hath cleansed, that call not thou common. This was done thrice, that's 3 times. And the vessel was received up again into the heaven. All right, now look at the following verses. Now, while Peter doubted in himself what this vision which he had seen should mean, behold, the men which were sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate and called and asked whether Simon, which was surnamed Peter, were lodged there. While Peter thought on the vision, the Spirit said unto him, Behold, 3 men seek thee. So he got the vision 3 times, and then there was 3 men, and these guys are Gentiles. Okay, they're Gentile guys. So we have to put ourselves in this time. This was a big deal for a Jewish man to keep company with Gentiles. All right. And so you're going to learn what God used for the vision to show Peter that, whoever he's said is clean, right? He gets that message. And you're going to see in verse 34, it says, Then Peter opened his mouth and said, Of a truth, I perceive. See, he perceived from that vision that God is no respecter of persons. See? And then he continues and says, But in every nation, he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is accepted with him. The word which God sent unto the children of Israel, preaching peace by Jesus Christ, he is Lord of all. See, up until this time, not everyone understood that the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob was actually everyone's God. They didn't understand that. So when people walk around today, go, well, there's one God. Yeah, but they didn't know that. So we take it for granted, but they didn't know that. They didn't know that. They didn't realize this. And that includes Peter. And now and how did God use what did he use in the vision? He used 4-footed beasts. He used creeping things, right? Fowls of the air. He used different kinds of wildlife, if you will, right? To prove to him that these may seem unclean to you. No, they're different from you, but they're still mine. See? And that's what I'm trying to say, that these are motifs that we should carry forward with us when we're reading the book of Revelation. And by the way, just a little side note, as you can see, he tore the veil. So whether you are from Israel or whether you are from Portugal, it doesn't matter. And so I'm going to ask those who have the futurist position, you kind of keep saying that there's a preference though, right? Because he's going to go back for Israel. There's no scripture to support that position. And I'm going to just be as direct as I can, but with some grace here, I'm going to suggest that in that, what you're saying is he's going to put that division back up again. And you're exalting a specific nation when I'm just reading here. And by the way, this is 4 times in the New Testament. It says he perceived that God is saying that he is no respecter of persons. All are free to come to him because he is, what does he say? By Jesus' grace, he's the Lord of all. So let's not create divisions again. Say, hey, let's everybody believe in God, trust in Christ. He paid the debt for you at the cross, and you have resurrection and hope because he's your forever high priest under the order of Melchizedek. That's what we should be saying, right? And let's keep it at that. I'm not saying that any nation should be lowered, but I don't think it's all nations are called to obedience to the faith. That's what it says in Romans 16 between verses 25 and 27. So that's the other issue with eschatology that takes the futurist position. I would ask you to think about that. Meditate on that. All right. So let's go back to Revelation 8 here. And as you can see, we're spending a lot of time outside of it for me to kind of show you that when you're seeing this, this is what this is about. And I kind of mentioned already that when you're seeing luminaries falling, it's like those kings that are falling, right? Because the idiom is these are the guys that are in charge, right? Like, so for example, Julius Caesar, right? Well, he fell, right? Nero, well, he fell, you see? That's the motif here. He's not talking about the literal stars smashing into the ground. He's not talking about that. What you're doing when we do that, we're taking all that motif language that's from the Old Testament, and then we throw it out and all of a sudden make everything super literal, even though this is a spiritual vision and a Jewish man is writing it, being given by Jesus Christ, who is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and God always spoke in these types of motifs and apocalyptic language. It's how he always spoke. And all of a sudden we just set it aside, right? You shouldn't do that. That's inconsistent. It's inconsistent. It's not proper hermeneutics. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. So again, right? The star is falling from heaven, right? I'm going to suggest to you who this could be, right? But I'm going to say in some level, it's some kind of Caesar, because remember, the Jews said, let his blood be upon us. We have no king but Caesar. They just pronounced who their God was. And guess what? This God cannot provide for them true and living waters, right? Just like the woman at the well, he says, anyone who comes to me has true and living waters, and they won't have to come to the well over and over and over again, right? Well, they chose the poisoned waters here. That's what they chose. And that's what all this is a picture of. That's why it continues. And so rivers, for example, doesn't have to be literal rivers, by the way, right? Because we learned that. It's already in the book of Revelation actually says what waters are. So these could be peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. I'm going to suggest that they are. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, which we can find in the book of Jeremiah as well. So we'll talk about that for a moment. And many men died of the waters. And what are waters? Peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Do you see? So what I'm saying is that this is an idiom of people dying because of the wars and the rumors of wars and all the civil wars. The zealots that had taken over the temple, for example, they were killing one another. In comes the Roman army, etc., right? Because they were made bitter. Bitter can also mean poisonous, right? But this is an idiom. It's not literal poisoned water, although I don't mind telling you, right? In some kind of war of that nature, when your civil servantry is collapsing, maybe some of your waters aren't going to be as safe to drink. So there is indeed going to be physical manifestation of these issues. However, the true issue is the collapsing of the system that they had, and the collapsing, of course, of the temple ultimately. And that's what it's actually talking about there. I think that that's the fuller vision of what's happening. So we see this wormwood, right? The waters became wormwood. They became poisonous. The waters are peoples and nations and tongues and multitudes. They became bitter. They became poisonous. Do you see the idiom there? It's the people. And so we've read before in some other videos how the book of Josephus started to talk about how people could be related to one another and they just didn't care anymore. It was like, it didn't matter. People who were actually literally dying, that people who were under this famine were going up to these folks thinking they were faking it to try to hide food. And so they'd go and attack, people being plundered and pillaged 2-3 times a day, the same house. So you're sitting in your house, someone comes blasting in, takes all your food for breakfast, and you're hoping to maybe get a little bit of lunch, and they come in again and they pillage you again. That's terrifying, right? So that's what was happening in the first century. That's what this is about. People becoming bitter and harming people. That's what this is about. And so for a moment, though, let us go to the book of Jeremiah and hit Jeremiah 9 for me, bro. All right. 11 to 15. Take a look. It says, "And I will make Jerusalem heaps and a den of dragons." Do you see this motif here? "And I will make the cities of Judah desolate without an inhabitant. Who is the wise man that may understand this? And who is he to whom the mouth of the Lord hath spoken, that he may declare it? For what the land perisheth and is burned up like a wilderness, that none passeth through. And the Lord saith, because they have forsaken my law, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, neither walked therein, but have walked after the imagination of their own hearts." And so understand, guys, because remember, net positive, net negative, you have to go back and read the kind of behaviors before, because people are sometimes sensitive to this. But again, this is historical, and the evil that was happening at that time was quite horrendous. All right. And so they're at the after Baalim. So there's, I don't want to describe because I don't like to make things more dark than they have to be, but just assume this was pretty bad stuff. God is a righteous God. He's not going to pronounce this because you guys are, waking up 10 minutes late when the alarm clock went off. When he's talking about his law, he's talking about his law of mercy, love thy neighbor. All that stuff was in the Old Testament. Don't steal. Don't lie to each other. Don't take advantage of each other. Don't take stuff from the widows, right? Defend the fatherless. He's constantly saying that through the Old Testament. Instead, they would take advantage of widows. They would harm the fatherless because they were weak. That type of thing, okay? And by the way, he claims that their fathers taught them this stuff. And this is why it's so important to have good parenting, by the way. Little side note. In verse 15, "Therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will feed them." Very specific again, not the entire world, right? This is Old Testament, but still same idea. He's speaking to who? So you got to take the audience relevance into this. He's not speaking to everyone under the sun here. He's speaking to a specific nation that has his laws, and they're specifically doing the opposite. And I think we can all relate to that in the last 2 or 3 years. Here's the law. Well, we don't care. Right? I mean, I don't mind telling you. I had literally people just say that to me. Oh, I don't care. I don't care what the law is. They told me you can't come in. Period. See? Wicked. Now, again, smaller degree, same vibe, same picture. "So, behold, I will feed them, even this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink." All right. And I don't mind telling you, as you continue to see, you'll see all the motifs, the same type of motif that's in the book of Revelation. Remember, the main purpose that I'm trying to get to everyone is this is not prophecy. This is history. This is history. Jesus was born in history. He died on the cross in history. He's raised from the dead and started that beautiful kingdom of God that does not come with observation. That spiritual kingdom, that kingdom that is not of this world, that's history. All right? And he said, this generation shall not pass before all things be fulfilled. And all things, which includes the feasts of the Bible, by the way, right? So Feast of Trumpets being one of those feasts. All right? And so we're witnessing this being fulfilled historically. See? So we don't want people to be frightened of what happened in history. We want to learn from history, as we always should try to learn from history. All right? So I'm going to suggest, this is just a suggestion, that this could be Nero coming in and making the waters bitter because he teamed up. He was married to a Jewish woman. We've talked about that before. And he started teaming up with the Jews. Guys like, I think, Agrippa and stuff like that were getting extra power. They were making some deals. And then they, of course, started to come against Christians. And that's where that great tribulation started to kick off. So some of that might be in here. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten. So again, no, don't think, oh, the sun's falling off. No. This is a picture of the authorities being brought down. We read a little bit in the book of Josephus how the zealots started killing those who were actually higher up and kidnapping them and stuff like that and taking them out, right? So those people represent who? Who do they represent? The higher ups of the powers, right? So when you see this, think of governmental structure, the heavens, right? And the stars and the sun and the moon and the organization. Now this is all falling apart, collapsing. That's what you're thinking, right? And the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars. Notice it's very, very consistent in the number, right? So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and night likewise. So what you're seeing there, I'm going to suggest to you, is basically the powers that be. We use those types of motifs, don't we? Right? They're being quenched. So these luminaries that are being quenched here, that's a picture, a motif of people being quenched that are in higher positions. All right, so you're seeing a loss of beauty, and you're seeing a loss of worship. You're seeing a loss of authority of God. You're seeing a loss of order, right? You're seeing a loss of value of human life, which always dissipates when we turn our backs on God, specifically nationally. And of course, when people start abandoning the fear of God, they decide that they're going to become God themselves. And then guys or girls who step into powerful positions start exalting themselves and start deciding that you shouldn't have informed consent. And by the way, not caring for your mouth too much so you can muzzle that along with your nose, see? And you might want to put a shield on that too, see? Because they've decided they know what's best for everyone. See what happens when you turn your back from God? People always step in. Some pinky in the brain are always going to show up. How can we take over the world? They have no God. See, that kind of thing. All right. Hey, that was fun to do that imitation. I don't know if it was good, but it's still fun. All right. And I'm going to, by the way, mention here, maybe I'll actually take you to the Greek on this. It says, and I beheld and heard an angel flying. That's not actually an angel. That's not a great translation there. Most of the other translations, if I recall correctly, did a pretty good job. But just to show you in the Greek, it's actually eagle. All right. And the reason why I feel that that's fairly important is because of what, I'm not Revelation 8. There we go. Of what the eagle represents in motif, right? So when you see angel, right, you're all of a sudden we're back to kind of imagining crazy things kind of happening up in the skies, but it's actually not so much that, I don't think. Although there are some accounts of crazy, wild things happening in the heavenlies, right? So that's definitely part of it. But ultimately, what do these motifs really mean? So as you can see here it says an eagle flying, right? It says, and I looked and I heard one eagle flying in mid-heaven saying, so this eagle is speaking, right? So that's how you know it's a spiritual vision, right? In this particular case. And in a voice loud saying, woe, woe, woe to those dwelling. By the way, he says woe 3 times. If I recall correctly, I think that there's 3 more trumpets that have to sound off. It says on the earth, again, the word is gi, so limiting it to a specific region or area, because of the remaining voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels, all right, being about. See, there's that word mayo, right? 3195. So tense sometimes alters how it's spelt here, but it's the same word. It's about to sound their trumpets, all right? And so I just wanted to show you that so that when I read it as eagle, you'll understand why I'm doing that. Sorry, bro, can you hook me up there? Revelation 8, the tab right there at the top. Unless that, of course, am I all good now? Oh, is this it? Nice. Thanks, bro. All right. So it talks about, he says, and I beheld and heard an angel flying, which is an eagle flying, through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels. And so that was a different word. I'll go back and show you that, which are yet to sound. So just let's take care of that too, just to show you that. See, angelon, that's angels. That's not this word. This is I2. Okay. 105, different number, and 32 here. Okay. So it's a different number. Just wanted to make sure you guys got to witness that. And why do I think the motif? Because an eagle is swift in judgment. I think that that's what that signifies, right? Because this ultimately, once these things start to ramp up, once it starts revving, it really revs, right? So it's 42 months is the final great tribulation. And so I'm kind of seeing this as the eagle is the motif of now here comes some really swift and precise judgment. Very precise, right? The eagle eye kind of a thing, very precise and very quick and swift. That's the motif there. And I think that that's what's being said here. And I did want to speak to the motif a little bit more using Isaiah to push the heavens and the earth, the luminaries and things of this nature to cause you to kind of see this. So go Isaiah 1 for me, bro. All right. And this is Old Testament again. And that's where we grab this apocalyptic language. That's where we grab these motifs that God spoke through the prophets. And that's how we're supposed to carry it forward. And that's the other issue. What happens is when people put it into futurism, right? You immediately stop to think to use this language the same way. You alter how you're using the language. But if you stay in the same frame of the language, then that won't happen. So that's been very helpful, at least to me. And here we go. It says, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem, very specific to who this is to at the time, so that you don't put yourself in there. Don't put Canada in there. We glean from it. Excuse me, we can glean from this information, but we're not supposed to make ourselves them. That's not. So it's to them and for them at that time, right? It's for us to glean from historically so that we can understand the character of God and we can understand the gospel and we can understand what grace and truth means. But as he continues, as you can see, look at this. He says, he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. That's who he's primarily speaking to here. Notice he specifies that these are the kings of Judah. And he says, hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. See? So he's not making a prayer to the heavens, nor is he praying to the earth. He's calling the people specifically of Judah and Jerusalem, and more so, I'm going to suggest here, it's a suggestion, it's up to you if you want to accept this, but the heavens are the higher ups, and the earth are those civilians that maybe also have some pretty good influence as well. Or maybe civilians that are going along with these higher ups. Have you ever experienced that? Where these higher ups make a decision and a bunch of civil servants go, okay, as long as you're paying me. Have you ever experienced that? Maybe those civilians are kind of rolling with those higher ups. You see, he's talking to people when he says, hear, O heavens. It's not like the heaven and hear, O earth. He's not talking to the earth. Hey, where's the ear of the earth? Like, you got an earlobe? Yeah. No, he's talking, right, to, so you can see this heavens and earth motif. So when Jesus says heaven and earth will pass away, he's not saying when heaven and earth are completely annihilated and destroyed and obliterated. No, he didn't say that. And you pop in this motif, which you should, because he's the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? Came with the words of God, right? So, and God put his words in Christ. What kind of language do you think from time to time Jesus might use? He's using the same motif. And who is he speaking to? Israelites in the first century. This is the kind of language they would understand. They would know to put it together, right? So when he says heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not, he's not talking about the entire world being destroyed, which then when people see it that way, then that's what precipitates the whole idea that he's going to come back and who knows what he's going to do, right? No. O heavens, give ear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. And remember in that prayer, when he says, they have rebelled against you, Lord, that's the perspective of those people who are staying righteous before God, trying to stay in the commandments of God, which includes not stealing, not lying, not taking stuff from people. That's a lot more difficult to do when people in power are corrupt. And so they start praying. The psalmist starts praying because some of the children of Israel themselves, and of course, a lot of the higher powers are moving along and gaining more power and becoming richer through abuse and corruption rather than goodness and staying obedient, where God says, you have to judge righteously. For example, adulterous woman, right? Where was the gentleman? He's not there. Right? Where was the 2 and 3 witnesses that is required? None necessary. Just, here you go. No proper trial or anything like that. That's not how you're supposed to conduct yourself. So that's just an example off the top of my head. And of course, we could use the trial of Christ himself, right? How about John the Baptist? What was his charge again? Oh yeah, he told Herod, hey, it's against the law to marry your own brother's wife. See what happened to him? That's called corruption, folks. It's not that John did anything wrong. He didn't say anything wrong, you see. So what I'm trying to show you here, though, that the prophet says, hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. And he's talking about, I have nourished and brought up children. Those are his kids, he's saying, and they've rebelled against me. And how are they doing that? By no longer operating in any shape, way, or form the way God has told them to operate. They're being abusive, corrupt, and cruel. All right? And as he continues, by the way, I won't go too much further. He says, the ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib. But Israel doth not know. My people doth not consider. See, they don't even care. They're not even thinking about that. What's lining my pockets? Hey, let's go along to get along. Whatever's better for us. We're the ones that have the power. Let's get some more. Who cares about all that other stuff? And then as he continues, he says, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel into anger. They are gone away backward, right? And so who is he talking to? He's talking to the power structures and the people that are going along with these power structures and these corrupt leaders that are no longer doing the righteous things that God made very clear how he wanted them to operate. And this is not so much as the rudiments, right? The temple rudiments. He's talking about iniquity. When you see the word iniquity, notice he doesn't mention, like, oh, you guys are late for the feast or anything like that. He's talking about evil, corruption. Do you see that? And they're provoking him because of the iniquity. Iniquity is doing, stealing, lying, cheating, bearing false witness, not judging righteously for the fatherless, no grace, no mercy, no consideration, just lining your pockets, taking bribes, et cetera, right? That's what's going on here. So to kind of wrap this up, I wanted to kind of repeat, if you don't mind, the overall picture that I'm seeing going down here in Revelation chapter 8, all right? When you see this de-beautifying, all right, I'm going to suggest to you this is what happens when people turn their back on God and worshiping one true God, right? So when we turn away from the message delivered to us by Christ to believe on the one who sent him and heed his words, Christ's words, because God's words, Christ gave them to us. So you believe unto righteousness, right? And you seek God and you seek him in the Spirit, right? And you believe and you have faith. That when we stop doing that, the state or people or corporations start to decide they themselves will become God. So now the delivery of that is you're going to lose some beauty. And right, for example, our country has been a little darker for the last couple years. And then, of course, the result is that loss of worship. It also causes devolving, if you will, into chaos because we're all apostatizing, right? We're turning our backs. And then from there, the authority of God, right? The supremacy of God. For example, in the Canadian Bill of Rights, people forget all about that, right? And then all of a sudden, I don't mind saying, I'll use Canada as an example, the charter, the wording there snuck right by everybody, right? We have to admit that. That section 1 was always there. I mean, it was the first paragraph. Talk about being blinded to what no one really noticed. It seemed, oh, that seems fine. That seems fine. No, it doesn't. That's the charter saying that it can override your rights. It gives you the rights and take it away. No, that's not. That's not supremacy of God. That's supremacy of state. But see, it got by us because we turned our back from the true and living God. And who's that? That's Jesus's Father, right? The Father sent Christ Jesus. He didn't send anyone else. I mean, he sent other prophets, but he sent Christ Jesus, all right? He didn't send me in that time. He didn't send Deepak Chopra or Popra or Oprah, all right? So we have to stay in the faith. I think it's an important thing, and that's why we're seeing the results of turning our backs. And again, these are my suggestions, And of course, when you lose that authority and supremacy of God in our everyday and every moment lives, right? What ends up happening is the state tries to become God, and that's where you get that kind of tyrannical attitude and the communistic feeling that starts to happen from that. And of course, eventually that has to create what? In the name of trying to create order, you guys are essential. You guys are not essential. See, that's order. See, but that's human order, discriminating against people. When God says he's not a respecter of persons, the state comes in and says, but we are. You see, but they do it in the name of order. No, No, that's not order. That's tyranny. That's discrimination. But they'll try to sing that little song, of course, right? But ultimately, what is it really? It's a loss of true order. It's a loss of it. Because now it's no longer everyone is equal under God, right? Now it's whatever the state says. See? And men can certainly, and women can fall prey to greed, bribe, and quite frankly, even just pride, right? They think they know better what's for you and me. No, you don't. So, and then that brings in that loss of order. And I don't mind saying a big result of that, when you lose that, what happens is the value of human life begins to dissipate and evaporate. And I don't mind telling you, you can kind of see that, can't you? With the whole, I think it's called euthanasia stuff, and of course the abortion stuff, right? Human life doesn't matter as much, you see? And then as we abandon that fear and love of God, that pure love of God, the beauty of those folks who bear his image start hiding their faces. And I don't mind saying, maybe this is a little too spiritual, but I think that that's what that mask was all about. Hiding the image of God, not letting you shine your light and speak out against this tyranny. But see, and that's another thing that this futuristic position is just, guys, I'm just going to share my opinion. You don't have to agree with me. But what ends up happening is, and I don't mind telling you, I was at a recent men's breakfast. In fact, I was there yesterday. And it was a men's breakfast, all Christian men, best as I knew. And the majority, I won't say all, but the majority of them speaking about how all this horrible stuff is about to come upon us. And it was all based on the idea that the book of Revelation's got to happen. The NWO's got to happen. It's like the NWO is not even in there. Right. And they're just, it's all that. Right. And it's kind of like, well, but so then what are we supposed to do? You're almost self-fulfilling the prophecy is what I'm saying. A prophecy that's not even in scripture. You're just going to bring on all kinds of bad because you're not doing what Christ said to do, which is what? Shine the light, right? Speak the words of truth against the lies, right? Do the right thing. Have faith. So when he talks about moving mountains and casting it into the sea, he's not saying take a Denver, Colorado mountain and bring it over to Wisconsin. He's talking about you speak the truth against these power structures, school boards, education boards, nursing and doctor boards, and you guys know the words better than I do, but you know what I'm talking about. These power structures, when they're doing something wrong, right, we're called to speak against it. And when you speak the truth, right, the truth of God's words particularly, right, and point out and expose the evil, right, and hold people accountable to their actions, right, particularly those who are, much is given, much is required, they're in powerful positions. That's what we're called to do. And what ends up happening, if people are always thinking they're either about to get raptured or about to get killed, they don't do what they're supposed to actually be doing. I don't think they're tuning into God's voice because they're too busy either thinking they're going to get whisked away or killed, And so I think it's a very big distraction. And I think fear just casts out perfect love, guys. It's what the scriptures say. So hopefully what you're seeing here is an historical event that ultimately is teaching us to worship and love God through Christ, to understand that there's grace and mercy at the throne of God, that even though we're imperfect people, he's forgiving and loving, right? Walk in his spirit, do good things. There's plenty of information in Titus and Timothy to tell you what the good things are. Avoid the bad things, right? Seek brothers and sisters, help each other out. When you're reading chapter 8, you're seeing an historical event occur to a country a nation that had gone apostate. That's what you're seeing. And that's the beginning of that historical judgment. So what can we glean from this as Well, I'm Canadian. Maybe some of you are American. What can we glean from this? Let's learn from that. Let's learn from that. Let's call people to worship the one true God, to get in Christ, to know that they have resurrection hope, that they need not fear death, because they have hope and resurrection hope in a spiritual kingdom that's waiting for you once you're done doing the will of God here in this earth, right here. Fear not, as Jesus always says, fear not, fear not. Don't fear. Get in tune with the Spirit. Pray often, and don't be afraid to pray imprecatory prayers. And indeed, walk in the light of the truth, and don't hide that image of God. That's what we can learn from this, and I think we can really help. And I really do. I'm getting a sense, I'm no prophet, but I'm getting a sense that things are turning around a little bit. And so if we keep pressing and calling other people to press against these inappropriate things, like we know that informed consent, for example, very, very important. It's crucial. We learn that from history. Very important. And to not make our paychecks more important than who we are to one another. Things of that nature. I think we can do that if we keep Christ-centered, God-centered, and remember the words that he left us. So hopefully this has been edifying to you guys, and hopefully I've been able to prove to you that it is worthy of taking a look at the book of Revelation as an historical book of the completion of the feasts that are in the Bible and the completion of the law, the old covenant Israel law, ushering in the beautiful new covenant under grace and truth in Christ Jesus. And may God be blessed, and may all of you continue to worship him. In the mighty name of Jesus, guys, I thank you so much for hanging out with me. See you soon. See you next week for Revelation chapter 9. In the meantime, grace and peace.
He's the anchor. He's the